All right. The room is filling up. Fantastic. We will be waiting a couple more seconds and then we will be starting. So, welcome to a glimpse into doing a PhD in Germany's top research organizations. This presentation will be recorded. Your presenters today will be Isabela Paredes Cisneros, the Helmholtz Junior spokesperson in 2020, Lea Lina Heckmann, the Max Planck PhD Net spokesperson in 2021, and me, Jacob Gormflos Lopez, the Leibniz PhD Network spokesperson of 2020. If you have questions, please write them in the Q&A section, not in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation where we will try to answer all of your questions. But let's start with what is N-Square. N-Square is the network of doctoral researchers networks. We are comprised of 4 basic networks: the Helmholtz Juniors, the Leibniz PhD Network, the Max Planck PhD Net, and the IPP Mainz PhD Network. We are elected and we represent more than 16,000 doctoral researchers all across Germany. We discuss the future of science, career perspectives, and their impact on society. Of course, we focus primarily on the assessment and the improvement of working conditions of doctoral researchers. And to really be able to do this, the individual networks have been conducting surveys to really find out how the doctoral researchers are doing. These PhD surveys provide us with the data that enable us to really know what the status quo of doctoral researchers in non-university research organizations is, to assess latent issues as well as identify areas of improvement. Furthermore, they enable us to highlight best practice examples and evaluate previously implemented measures to see what really works and what doesn't. Last but not least, these surveys also provide the doctoral researchers with an anonymous platform to voice their concerns. Although, of course, these surveys are specific for these non-university research organizations, we think that the findings can be applied and should be applied across academia. From these individual surveys that have been conducted throughout the years, N-Square has found their goals. Hence, we advocate for 100% payment for often more than 100% work for the 4-year contracts durations as a standard and the abolishment of stipends. Last but not least, we also advocate for the rather complicated topic of the prevention of power abuse. In 2019, N-Square did something new. We, the member organizations of N-Square, harmonized the questionnaire that was being used and did also do their surveys together. We surveyed the doctoral researchers in our organizations by the end of 2019, and around 29% of them, which is around 5,000 doctoral researchers, actually responded our 94 questions that we had in our survey. For me, for example, it took me around 50 minutes to really fill out this very long survey. These individual reports were then, these individual data sets were then analyzed, and the reports of these data sets were then published by the summer of 2020. And today we, because we have harmonized the survey, want to present to you the data in comparison. The data will not include the data of the IPP simply because of size differences between the relatively small IPP and the other 3 member organizations of n squared. All right, with that, let's jump into the data. First of all, with these kinds of surveys, the question is always demographics. Who are the people that we're actually serving? Who are the doctoral researchers in these 3 organizations? First of all, the average doctoral researcher in Helmholtz, Max Planck, or Leibniz is around 29 years old. And there is a near gender parity, for example, in Helmholtz, and in Max Planck, there are a few more men, while in Leibniz, there are a few more women. This is, we think, due to the topics that are researched in these organizations, as Leibniz has more social science than Max Planck. Last but not least, in the context of getting to know your doctoral researchers, is the nationality. The majority of doctoral researchers in these organizations is German, but a growing number, and already a very significant number, is international. With that said, it is something to always keep in mind when future policies with regard to science are implemented, that a growing amount of doctoral researchers actually are not German, but from either other EU countries or not the EU. With this, I would like to hand over to Leah. Leah will be telling you a little bit about working conditions.
Thank you very much, Jacob, for this nice introduction. I will now go more into detail on the working conditions and environments that we as doctoral researchers face. So first, we asked ourselves the question, what is it like to do a PhD? And to start on this, we asked what are the reasons that people do decide for doing a PhD? And what we found is that the main motivation from our doctoral researchers is the interest in their work and research topics. And this, together with the scientific excellence that's provided by our institutes and centers, is what drives them. Unfortunately, it does come at a cost, which are the high pressure environments that we see everywhere in academia. And this is reflected in our data if we, for example, look at the working hours. So here, with the figure on the left, you can see the amount of participants in percentage that do work more than 40 hours a week. And this is more than what's stated in the contract. The 3 columns do stand for the 3 organizations. So first, we do have Helmholtz, then we do have Max Planck, and as a last one, Leibniz. And we can see that the majority of the doctoral researchers, so around 3/4, does work overtime. Another indicator that we looked at is the holiday taking behavior of our doctoral researchers. And holidays would be important after this intensive working times to regain your energy and keep up the motivation. And what we're displaying here are the 2 extremes. So on the left-hand side, you again have a number of participants as percentage divided on the 3 organizations, this time reflecting the percentage that takes none or less than half of the holidays. And we can see that it's between 20 to 40%. On the other hand, if we look at the ones that take all of the holidays, we can see that this is around 1/3. And also we ask if people feel free to take the holidays, and we saw that around 1/3 of them does not feel free to take holidays. And this is mainly due to the high workload that doctoral researchers are facing. As a next topic, we looked more into detail on the employment types for our doctoral researchers. And there's a distinguishment between 2 main types. And the first one you can see here on the left, which are contracts. And again, you have the percentage distributed among the 3 organizations for all doctoral researchers that are mainly employed by a contract. And we can see that the majority of them is on a contract. And for the contracts, we see 2 main different types. So the first one is a public service contract, which is also used by universities mainly. And it includes the T4ED and the T4L E13 contracts. often they are applied by using part-time agreements with 50 or 65%, for example. As a second one, we have the support contracts, which were negotiated by our organizations and which are based on the public service contracts, but do have some differences. As a second employment type, what we do see are stipends. And we can see that around 10% of the respondents are employed by stipends. And this includes both internal stipends given by the organizations themselves and external ones. Another thing we see is that a small percentage, so around 2, is unpaid. And this is mainly at the end of the PhD when the contracts already ran out. And if we now focus more on the details of the contracts, what we first looked at is the mean monthly net income. And we can see that our doctoral researchers earn around 1,700 euros each month. But we also see that there's a big spread. And in this spread, what we do observe is that there are pay gaps between disciplines and also nationality and gender. And in our opinion, this is not in agreement with the basics of fundamental research. Also, when we do compare the two contract types I talked about before, so here in the first row, you can see the public service contract. So one of the typical ones would be a 65% part-time contract based on the T4ED E13 contract. And in the second row, you can see the support contracts, also based on the same salary level, which does result in a gross salary of 2,600 euros and as a net salary 1,700 and 1,800 euros. For the difference here is actually because for the public service contract, there's an additional retirement insurance included, which is not included in the support contract. One of the main differences we see is in the working hours. So for the public service contract, the working hours are adjusted to the percentage of the part-time agreement. So in this case, this would mean 25 hours per week. While for the support contracts, you always work full hours, no matter what your salary is based on. Both of the contracts do include social insurance and pension. And all of this together brings us to one of our important aims, and this is that we advocate for 100% payment for the 100% work that we are doing to remove all of these inequalities. And now more focus on the stipends. So as I said before, we have around 10% of our respondents that are stipend holders. And also here we can see a difference between nationalities. So this number does go up to almost 30% for non-Europeans and is lower for Germans. And now if we compare the stipends with the contracts, so here you have the same comparison as before. So on top you have the public service contract, but now in the second row you have a typical stipend. And what we can see is that the mean income is around 500 euros less for stipends than it is for contracts. And also for stipends, the gross and net salary is the same, since there's no tax or insurance being deducted. In the stipends, the working hours are not stated, and the same goes for the vacation days, which means there's no official agreement on the working time. And one of the main disadvantages, there's no health insurance or pension included. And this is why we strongly advocate for the abolishment of stipends, and especially internal ones. And now I will go to the last point in the working conditions that we looked at, which is the expected duration of a PhD. And here we asked our doctoral researchers when they started their PhD and when they expected to submit their PhD. And the numbers you can see here. And what we found is that this is mainly more than 3 years, going into the direction of 4 years. So the next question we ask is, how long are the contracts that doctoral researchers are given? And what you can see in the figure here is the percentage of doctoral researchers that has contracts that last longer than 3 years, again divided in the 3 organizations. And we can see that this is around 15 to 20%. So there is a big mismatch between the reality and what is stated in a contract. And this leads to financial insecurity, and it makes it very difficult to plan ahead if you don't know if you will get the extension that you need at the end of your PhD. And that's why we advocate for having 4 years as a standard for all doctoral researchers in our organizations, but also in Germany in general. And now, before I summarize our recommendations, I do want to mention that we see a lot of improvements in the last years, and we are already on a very good track. So in 2019, we saw an increase in holidays from 20 to 30 days. We do see a far higher percentage of contracts than stipends. And recently, the Ministry of Research and Education did approve the raise of the base salary for our support contracts from 50 to 65%. But there's still room for improvement. So what we would recommend is to have harmonized working conditions, which don't enable inequalities and imbalances as we saw before. And this means 100% payment for 100% work, and to ensure secure and stable working environments for all of our doctoral researchers, which means no stipends and contract durations that are adjusted to the expected duration of 4 years. And with this, I want to hand over to Isabella to focus on 2 other very important points of our service. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. So as we saw at the beginning of the presentation, we conducted the different surveys with a harmonized questionnaire, and one of the modules focused on power abuse and conflict. So now I'm going to talk first about the hierarchical structure of academia. So if we see in the graph, at the top, we will have the institute director, followed by the department head and the group leader. And then we will have the subgroup leader and staff scientists, postdoctoral researchers, and at the bottom, the doctoral researchers. So in this structure, few people hold the majority of power, and they have a direct impact on the individual career prospects. Therefore, the academic environment is particularly prone to abuse of power, inequalities, overdependencies, and conflicts. We asked the doctoral researchers about conflicts in the workplace, in particularly conflicts with the superiors. 15% of them reported to have experienced conflicts, and only 5% reported. That means that 10% of them did not report the incident. And we also asked about the satisfaction with the conflict management. And we see here that around 35% of them said to be dissatisfied with the conflict management, 20% of them are neutral, and 20 to 40% are satisfied with the report. We also asked about the awareness of conflict resolution mechanisms in place either at their own institution or in the general organization. And for this slide, I'm going to be referring specifically to the Max Planck PhDNet 2019 survey report. And here we can see different mechanisms. These are not all of them that were we asked about in the survey, but here we see the Institute Ombudsperson, General Works Council, external law firm, and PhD representatives. And one thing that we see here is that there is differences according to nationality. So the non-European doctoral researchers are the ones that are less aware of the different mechanisms. The best known services are the PhD representatives and the ombudsperson. But we have to have into account that in general, the PhD representatives have no training, no confidentiality agreement signed, and no real mandate when it comes to conflict resolution. And this also highlights that there are already many mechanisms to deal with conflict and to bring the conflict to a resolution, but mainly doctoral researchers are not really aware of this, mainly of those that are external to the institute and might be more independent. Now, regarding power abuse, we asked if they have experienced or witnessed sexualized harassment or bullying coming from the superior. And this is the result that we obtained. And for this part, we referred to experience and witness at least once, because we also asked about the frequency, if this happened once, occasionally, or monthly, weekly, or daily. So these are the ones that experienced sexualized harassment, around 5% of them, and around 9% of them witnessed. And when it comes to bullying coming from the superior, around 10% of them experienced it, and almost 25% of them witnessed the situation. Regarding power abuse, we have already published a position paper, which is called Power Abuse and Conflict Resolution. So I would invite you to scan the QR code for you to go directly to the document. But in summary, our recommendations in this regard are to implement measures for the prevention of power abuse, the protection of victims, arbitration of conflicts by an independent committee, and the implementation of consequences for offenders. The second module that we added to the questionnaire was regarding mental health, and now I'm going to address the topic of depression. For this, we use the patient health questionnaire, which is a questionnaire based on 9 questions to assess depressive symptoms. And this questionnaire was also used in the study that I'm going to refer to now. And they assessed the German population and found that the age group between 18 and 29 years old show 10% of them show depressive symptoms, moderate to severe depressive symptoms. And they also found that socioeconomic status correlates negatively with depressive indicators. And here you can find the reference to this study. In contrast, in our survey results, we found that 15 to 18% of the doctoral researchers have moderate to severe depressive symptoms, which corresponds to this upper part of the plot. And this wouldn't be really in accordance to this study. We are aiming for the highest education level, therefore for a high socioeconomic status, and we should be somewhere below this number that we see here for a similar age group in the German population. And we conducted a similar study on anxiety with a questionnaire that I'm not going to mention now for the sake of time, but I invite you to check that out also in our survey reports. Now coming to mental health and correlating factors to depressive and anxiety symptoms, we found that long working hours and little time off are correlated. We saw already there are a few holidays taken, and we work usually during the weekends. There are precarious working conditions, referring to the existence of stipends and the short duration contracts, and of course the cases of power abuse. So in this regard, we would recommend the raise of awareness for mental health in doctoral researchers and to tackle the underlying mechanisms. And with this, I would like to hand over again to Jakob to summarize our presentation.
Thank you, Isabella. This brings us to our last point, the key takeaways. As we have seen, that most new contracts are now being more and more 65% of an E13 of a TVÖD, as well as the fact that stipends are increasingly being replaced by working contracts. We applaud these, but we would like this trend to continue. Furthermore, the average duration of a PhD is around 4 years, but the average contract duration still falls short of that. Last but not least, not just with our report, but also with our reports, but also through other reports like the Nature survey, and also during the Corona crisis, of course, mental health has become a topic that is being discussed increasingly. We have seen the increasing awareness of power abuse and mental health, which leads us to the conclusion, which you can expect, you might know already. We continue to advocate for the things that we have advocated before already. We have seen that doctoral researchers usually work more than 100%, and we think that this should be merited with 100% payment. Stipends are really problematic and should therefore be abolished. 4-year contracts should become the norm, and the topic of prevention of power abuse has to be worked continuously. With this, we would like to thank all of you. We would like to thank the participants, first of all. I mean, we have now 332 people watching us. These are great numbers. Thank you all for joining in today. We would also like to thank our survey groups for doing all the work, all the analysis work, and for all the work they did on publishing our individual reports. We'd like to thank Theresa Kuhl for all the figures that she did for this presentation. Thank you, really, Theresa. You were always very helpful and always responded very quickly. And of course, also the N² Advisory Board and the N² Board for founding this organization and for continuously working on it. And last but not least, our general administrations of our mother organizations for all the help and support that they have been providing us with. With this, we come to the last section, which is going to be a Q&A session that will be moderated by Lindsay Bultema, the Max Planck PhD NET spokesperson of 2020. Hello, Lindsay.
Hello, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jacob, and thank you, Isabella, and thank you, Leah. I would like to, everyone, just maybe do a virtual clap for our presenters. And we are within time, so this gives us plenty of time to start the discussion. So how this will work, as you've read